Like it says in that thumbnail, it's all over but the shouting. Legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs at the national level. And specifically, marijuana has been getting a little more attention lately as the state of, ready for it? Texas. Yes, red Republican Texas is softening on the issue of marijuana now. It's done. It's all over with the shouting. Every state, one by one, is falling to the inevitable. We need to legalize not just marijuana at the national level. We need to legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs. Why? Because that is the only way to end the drug war. It is the only way to get people who get addicted the proper help they need. It is the only way to take the power out of the drug cartels that are crippling other countries around the world. In Latin America, in Eastern Europe, you want to take the power away from these criminal syndicates, you got to legalize the stuff. And also, you got to regulate them to the point where they're not nearly as harmful as they would be underground. And you have to provide addicts with the proper help, which, of course, ideally would be through a universal health insurance program, which, of course, mental health and AA, that plays a huge part in that as well. And as I said in my segment about sex work just now, if a woman in that industry has a problem with her employer, and now they're called pimps, I don't know what they would be called if it were legal, but anyway, if it were legal, then the woman who's working in that field would have somewhere to turn. She wouldn't have to go to a friend and keep it on the hush-hush, She would be able to deal with it much more effectively. Same thing with drug addicts here. Drug addicts would have a place to go now if all these drugs are legal. You want an example of how this works? Portugal. Look at Portugal's system. Effectively, they've decriminalized it across the board. So anytime you do drugs, if you become addicted, you get help. I mean, they have healthcare free at the point of service, just like most of the developed world. We are one of the only countries that don't have healthcare as a human right. And legalizing, taxing, and regulating drugs, may even generate enough revenue on a state level to where other states can begin getting their universal health insurance down. I mean, California could be, I don't know if this is set in stone yet, but they could be about to pass their own universal health insurance law, which would be excellent, because that would be a good acid test. It's the largest economy in the country on a state level, and that would be a great way to decide on a state level how good Medicare for all or universal health insurance would actually work. The only problem, though, is the private insurance industry is still in the state. Private hospitals, private everything is still in the state. Their lobbying arm is much stronger. So you do have that hurdle. So if the results come out negative if that thing passes, understand that there is a lobbying effort in the opposite direction that plays a part in that. So just because it fails in the state of California doesn't mean it's a bad idea overall. You have to really take these things with a grain of salt, analyze it on their merits, not based on propaganda that you're fed from simple-minded idiots. Now, the thing is, people who have certain conditions, like with marijuana, for instance, because Texas is looking at it, other states have been looking at it, I believe Mississippi's been looking at it. People who have seizure conditions, people who have glaucoma, people who have anxiety disorders, people who suffer from depression, people who have attention deficit problems, a whole bunch of stuff is treatable with the right breed and the right species of cannabis. If it's grown at you pick it at the right stage, you harvest it at the right stage, you process it properly, it can be used for so many things. The only thing to worry about really is Big Pharma getting its greedy mitts on it and turning it into another for-profit price gouging enterprise. We don't want that, right? Which is another reason why, in addition to legalizing, taxing, and regulating all drugs, we need to simultaneously have a universal health insurance system. Get rid of the damn insurance mafia that's out there price gouging everybody, and nationalize Big Pharma. Nationalize Big Pharma, nationalize Big Pharma, nationalize Big Pharma. They are criminals. They are the most crooked people you could ever meet. And the thing is, this is an industry that is literally set up to put profits over human life. It's like, oh, don't you want to be on the forefront of finding a cure? We want to help in curing people and saving them. And no, you don't. You just want to create customers. Which is why when we fully legalize and tax and regulate all drugs, we have to not only nationalize the drug industry, but we have to make producers of those drugs small businesses, local businesses. Emphasize local economy in the infrastructure of this type of system, and have an anti-monopoly system in place to make sure that nothing gets consolidated. That, to me, would be the best way to do this. Tax-funded local business. That's the best way, in my opinion. It's all over but the shouting. Like over 60, now maybe 70% of the country overall says yes, legalize marijuana. And even a majority of Republicans now want that. Again, Texas of all states, Texas is about to legalize marijuana, or could be about to legalize marijuana. But as to why they're doing it, I honestly don't know. It might just be because they see the writing on the wall, and it's like, okay, well, what's the point of fighting this war any longer? We need to get to the same point on all drugs. We need to get to the same point on sex work. We need to get to the same point on healthcare, obviously. We need to get to the same point on fighting corruption. I think this is a no-brainer here. More people than ever now believe that corruption should be treated as like a capital offense, and I'm one of them. So what you do is, on top of basically nationalizing big pharma, getting rid of the private insurance markets, getting rid of, politicians being allowed to own private stocks, that all comes together to create a much better system for everyone in the country. Because now it's no longer just a small group of elites at the top who get to have all the say because they have all the capital and all the power. Now everything is decentralized. Now it's much more democratic. Now we can have more proportionate representation in Congress. Now we can actually see our will carried out if that happens. And the way I've outlined the legalization, taxation, and regulation of all drugs here is a good way to do it. So that's my take on that. Legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs. Yes, there are some drugs that are harmful, but guess what? Alcohol is harmful. Tobacco is harmful. Opioids are harmful. And those are all legal. Marijuana, no such thing, buddy. You can't OD on marijuana. As for heroin, as for crack, cocaine, things like that, those need to be tightly regulated. Those need to be overseen, yes, but they need to be legal. Because if done properly, they can be managed. And people who decide to use them, they can get the help they need when they need it. And they're not criminalized. They're not thrown in prison. And this ties in, of course, to the prison industrial complex, and I'll get into a video about that later. But there is literally no reason to have all these drugs outlawed, again, like sex work, like gambling, like a lot of these other businesses that are outlawed that are perfectly normal otherwise. This is normal too. I mean, hell, you're worried about people tweaking their consciousness. What do you think happens when you eat food? Huh? What happens when you drink water? You hydrate, right? Something's happening in your body. What happens when you eat tuna fish? It's brain food, omega-3. Something's happening in your body. Something chemical. When you eat figs, you feel yourself rejuvenated. Something happens to you down there. It's the same with drugs. Okay? Something chemical happens in your body when you put something inside you. Drugs, food, water, doesn't matter. It's just some of it is harmful and it does need to be regulated, and you need to have help for people there who decide to use that stuff. So that's, again, this is ridiculous. It's all over but the shouting. Stop this ridiculous war. Legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs. And let's move on in a much more civilized society where everybody can prosper and thrive.